Hello and welcome back to What's Millie Making, where I'm Millie and this is the space where I talk about the past, present, and future of my making, mostly knitting. Today's video is Knitting Podcast episode 12. So I haven't been knitting as much over the past month, but it has been 4 weeks since my last podcast. So this will probably be another one on the longer side. And last episode, I was very much into knitting the winter accessories, and that's still continuing. I'm still very much into them, even though my current project is taking me a little bit of time. But let's just jump into finished objects. So my first finished object I don't have with me, so there will be a picture at some point on the screen. And I also talked about it in my previous podcast because it was a work in progress then, and it is the Waum mittens. These are a free pattern. I don't remember the designer's name off the top of my head, but it's in the notes for this video, and I always put the name on screen as well. So these are a 2x2 ribbed fingerless mitten pattern. You start at the cuff and you work your way up, working some increases for a thumb gusset, putting those stitches on hold, and then knitting the rest of the mitten. Pretty standard construction. The pattern does come in a few sizes, which I really like, as I've been looking at a lot of mitten patterns over the past month, and sometimes they don't have a lot of sizes or they only have one size. So the fact that this is a free pattern that has multiple sizes, I like that. And it is in a 2x2 rib, which I knit to match a 2x2 hat, which I also gave as a gift. And that was another free pattern that I talked about in my previous podcast episode, the 2x2 hat by Anne Gagnon. I'm unsure how to pronounce the designer's name, but I really liked both of these patterns. Both of the patterns were written for worsted weight yarn. However, I used an Aran weight yarn, so I basically just went down a size that I was making. So for these mittens, I'm pretty sure the sizes are written. You don't have finished measurements, but they give you a size for children's, women's, men's, etc. So I knit the women's size, hoping to have a mitten that would fit a man, and it did. The only part that I didn't love about this mitten construction, it's pretty straightforward. I didn't love the thumb gusset. I just felt like it was maybe a little bit too big, and also the whole mitten is knit with a 2x2 rib, but then the top of the thumb, not the gusset, the top of the thumb has a 1x1 rib to finish it off, and I feel like it didn't look completely seamless. Now, Purl Soho does have a mitten and hat set actually called the Watch Cap mitten and hat set, something like that. I know Watch Cap is definitely in the name, and this is also a 2x2 rib pattern, and I'm pretty sure it's written for sport weight. And for that one, the thumb gusset has the 2x2 rib continuing, so I think it looks a little bit seamless. And part of the reason I picked a ribbed mitten pattern for a gift knit is because I wouldn't have to be as worried about if it would fit the recipient or not, because rib is quite stretchy. I mean, the thumb gusset fit him completely fine. It's just something as a knitter I would notice. And yes, what I was saying, in the future, if I were to knit a 2x2 ribbed mitten in an worsted or Aran weight, what I would do is I would take the casting on stitch count for this pattern and then follow the increasing and shaping from that Purl Soho pattern, because I just like the way that the integrated 2x2 rib thumb gusset looks versus a plain stockinette thumb gusset. What else is there to say about this project? So overall, it was a very quick and easy project. Each mitten took me only a few hours. I think I knit it over 2 evenings basically. I do remember that I think either the first or the second mitten, I watched all 3 episodes, the first 3 episodes of the US Traders, the current season that's ongoing, and I think each episode is about an hour. So each mitten took me about 3 hours, which is pretty great. And I did use less than 100 grams of yarn for the mitten. And I think I also knit it a little bit longer than the pattern suggested. And then the yarn that I used for this pattern was Line Brand Local Wool. This was my first time using this yarn, and I really enjoyed it. It's not rustic, but it's not soft. It's just like a pretty standard wool. I would say it's softer than, so I bought this at Joann, so let me compare it to the other non-superwash wools that I can find at big box stores near me, which is Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool and Patton's Wool Worsted. And these are both 100% non-superwash wools. And I would say that this Lion Brand local grown wool, I would say, is softer than both of those wools. And it is an Aran weight wool versus the Patton's, I think, is a worsted, and the Fisherman's wool, I think, is an Aran / bulky. I haven't knit with that one because it is quite a bit rustic. Sadly, though, this is only available in stores at Joann's, and if you know, you know. Joann's, who knows what's going to happen to it, and it's technically on clearance at Joann's, so even if Joann's sticks around, I don't know if they will keep this yarn in stock. That said, you can find it on the Lion Brand website, and actually I went to Vogue Knitting Live last month, and the what's it, Keynes & Co. They were bought out by Lion Brand, I think, a year or two ago, and they had some of this wool at their booth. And oh, I didn't even mention the main reason I was interested in this yarn. First, it's nice to see a 100% wool non-superwash yarn at a big box store. And number two, the yarn is sourced and milled in the US, which is really not something I see very often in big box stores or from more affordable brands like Lion Brand. So I really like that they were offering it. The full price of the skein, I think, is $16 or $17. However, because this was clearanced at Joann's, I got it for 50% off. So my project cost for this pair of mittens was like $8.50. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's like $16.95 full price. So let's say my total cost for this project was $8.50, which is a great price for a pair of 100% wool mittens. So that's my first finished object. My second finished object is yet another pair of mittens, and this one, oh, I just noticed the sun situation, but it is what it is. My second finished object is another pair of mittens, and this pair I knit for myself. Here is my second finished object. These are the Purl Soho Arched Gusset Mittens. This is another free pattern written for worsted weight yarn. Technically, the yarn that I knit this with has Aran in the weight, but I would say it's a worsted weight yarn. So this again has a similar construction to the Waum mittens in that you start with the wrist, you do gusset increases for thumb, put those thumb stitches on hold, and you knit the rest of the mitten. The reason I really, really like this mitten pattern, I think this is the third time I've knit these. I've knit two other pairs that I gave away as gifts. I really like the arched gusset. I think it gives more mobility to your thumb than a standard construction, like standard thumb construction. So you are increasing on every single row for the thumb gusset, and with the traditional mitten construction, the stitches that you are increasing are usually the stitches that you put on hold for the thumb. However, in this mitten pattern, you increase, and then those increased stitches get worked into the like hand palm part of the mitten, and you put a whole different set of stitches on hold for the thumb. My one critique of this pattern is I do find it kind of confusing the way that they write the instructions when they tell you which stitches to put on hold for the thumb. And I guess I was confused last time too, because when I was confused this time, I ended up going on Ravelry and checking my project notes for my previous version that I knit last year, and I just followed my instructions for that, and it made more sense versus what they have written in their pattern. But aside from that, this is a very straightforward, easy pair of mittens to knit up, and again, each mitten only takes like a few hours. I also knit these over like 2 or 3 days with not a lot of knitting time, and it's a great use for leftover yarn because I also used less than 100 grams for this pair of mittens. Let me put them both on to show them off. And we did get some snow recently, and I did wear these in the snow. So here you can see the arch of them. I've kind of been thinking of self-drafting a pair of mittens because I really liked the 2x2 rib mittens. So I'm thinking of writing myself or making myself a pair of 2x2 ribbed mittens where I incorporate an arched gusset. That will be, we'll see if I actually follow through on that, because I always say I'm going to self-draft something and then I just get distracted. I forgot to mention my other modification was to add a pretty long 2x2 ribbed cuff. The pattern as written is fully stockinette, and then I guess you just have like a little bit of a purl at the end where the stockinette would roll over. However, I did want these to be functional, and I feel like the ribbing makes it stick closer to my wrist, so when I'm wearing it outside I don't have to worry about like wind or air getting in. Like there's no gap for my wrist to get cold with the 2x2 rib. The yarn that I used for this project is Hedgehog Fibers Merino Aran in the colorway Hush. It's a very pretty tonal purple color, and this was actually left over from my Sophie hood, which I knit and talked about in my last podcast episode. Actually, I have it in front of me. So for my Sophie hood, I used 2 skeins of this Hedgehog Fibers, or I had 2 skeins of this Hedgehog Fibers Merino Aran, and I was doing 2 row stripes, alternating it with Spin Cycle Dream State in the colorway Love Spell. And I really like how this color combination turned out. For like better close-up videos, you can watch the previous podcast. Anywho, I had about like, I want to say about anywhere from 70 to 80 grams left over of my second skein for this. So I just used that to make these mittens. So my total project cost is kind of difficult to calculate because I didn't use a whole skein of yarn on this. So I will just say like my total project cost for both of these, I will write it somewhere on the screen because I don't remember off the top of my head, but basically I had gotten this Hedgehog Fibers Merino Aran on super sale during the New York City yarn crawl from Annie and Company. They're a yarn store on the Upper East Side, and they have so much yarn. They don't have an online store, so it's hard to know what they have in stock, but if you're like in the neighborhood or in the area, definitely check them out because they just have a ton of yarn, and they do have like 20% off sales throughout the year. And when I got this yarn was like already clearanced on 50% off, and then during the New York City yarn crawl, they have all purchases an extra 20% off. So I basically got 2 skeins of the Hedgehog Fibers yarn for less than the price of one, which was a major win. And I have 2 finished objects that have already been getting so much wear. And actually, this was pretty deep stash. This was from my first year of knitting. Yeah, it was just really nice to finally work up that yarn, and I think the color is very pretty. That is the end of my finished objects. Like I said, I really haven't been knitting that much over the past month, but I have made some progress on my works in progress, and I've also cast on something new. So let me talk about my new cast on because it is yet another pair of mittens. So my first work in progress is another pair of mittens. These are the Mondial mittens by Autumn and Indigo. They are a sport weight cabled convertible mitten, and again, same construction. Start at the wrist, work your way up, put the thumb stitches on hold. But then this one is a little bit different because since it's convertible, you're also putting some of the palm stitches on hold. Do a little close up so you can see the cabled pattern. It's a fairly easy cabled pattern, and I've been knitting them magic loop. This is my first time doing a convertible mitten. I remember when I first started knitting, I tried looking at a convertible mitten pattern and it just completely confused me. I downloaded multiple free patterns off Ravelry and none of them made sense, and I think it's just like a testament to my progress over the last 3 years that I've reached a point where I didn't have any problem understanding how this construction works, and I totally want to knit more convertible mittens in the future. So this set is a gift pair for my mom. Started the second pair. Now I do have some minor complaints about this pattern. So one thing is, most of the time when I'm starting a new pattern, I don't always read the pattern in its entirety before starting because I think that can be kind of overwhelming and I get confused. However, I do think that's necessary for this pattern because you constantly have to like flip pages back and forth because of the way that the pattern is formatted. So it starts off with the cuff and then you have to flip to the next page to go to the next section, but then you have to flip it back to the first page when you finish that first section. And yeah, I didn't really love the formatting for that reason. There is a chart, but only the right mitten is charted. The left mitten is just written like, just knit it in adverse, just knit, or what am I trying to say? The left mitten instructions are just like, for the chart, says knit the left mitten in reverse, the thumb stitches are, and then like the sentence is cut off. It doesn't tell you where the thumb stitches are. And I made sure to check that I have the most updated version of the pattern downloaded. So that was also like a minor annoyance that there's that error. And the pattern does write out row by row every single step in the chart. So like if you can't read charts, there are row by row instructions, but I personally just find it easier to read charts. So as I was confused by the left mitten instructions, like what do they mean by inverse? Does it mean that you also flip the direction of the cables? How are the thumb increases worked? It was not very clear in my opinion if you were purely looking at the chart and like those brief instructions. So in that case, the row by row instructions did come in handy because then I could read those and then figure out what they meant by inversing the chart. Yeah, that was just like my biggest annoyance because where you work the thumb increases is drastically different in the right mitten versus the left mitten. The right mitten, you are knitting them in the middle of the row. Then in the left mitten, you are knitting them in the beginning of the row. So if you do end up knitting these mittens, I would recommend reading the whole pattern and knitting the right mitten first, because if you understand the construction, it will be easier to knit the left mitten afterwards. In an ideal world, I think I would prefer if the designer had just made a chart for the right mitten and a chart for the left mitten. I don't know. I have been having a lot of thoughts on mitten patterns because I've been like in this mitten mode. And I think there's so many great free mitten patterns out there. And then when it comes to paid mitten patterns, I haven't been purchasing any because I'm just finding them a little bit lackluster. So if I think about a price of a sweater pattern can be anywhere from like $7 to $10 on average, and it comes in a wide variety of sizes, and it's like a whole garment. And then when I look at mitten patterns, they're oftentimes the same price and they only come in one size. And then sometimes like the Ravelry page will just be like, if you want to knit a different size, you can just change your gauge. But like, if I'm paying that much for a pattern, I want the work to be done for me. I don't know if I'm just being like overly picky or whiny or whatever, but I feel like I feel like I'm just not getting my value with a lot of knitting patterns. With a lot of mitten patterns. Maybe that's because sweater patterns are underpriced. I don't know. That is just my minor beef with mitten knitting patterns. So I would recommend these patterns with those like side notes. I do know that Yuka also has a cabled mitten pattern in sport weight, and if I was going to purchase like let's say today I decided I want a sport weight cabled convertible knitting pattern, I probably would purchase the Yuka one over this. I don't have that pattern, so I don't know how it is, but just from like my previous experience with Yuka patterns, I find them to be clearer for my understanding. This pattern, I think I purchased it last year or 2 years ago, I don't remember. But basically, I already had it in my pattern library, so when I was wanting to knit a mitten in this yarn combination in this style, it just made sense to use the pattern that I already had. And I do really like the finished object. It's just like those minor annoyances with the way that the pattern is formatted. And the yarn combination that I'm using for this mitten is, I have the yarn balls here actually. I am using Knitting for Olive soft silk, mohair, and merino in the bottle green colorway. And I've actually used both of these bases individually, but this is my first time using them together. And this is another yarn that is a deep, deep stash. I got this, I think like almost exactly 3 years ago. I purchased this for the sweater number 15, I think. It's the My Favorite Things knitwear sweater that has all the cables all over it. And I was unsure if I wanted to break into that sweater quantity that I had to make these mittens, but I'm glad I did because now I can see. So I'm perfectly happy with how the cables look in the mitten. Like in the sunlight, you can, I don't know in the video if you can see it, but in real life in sunlight, I can see the cables, and because they stretch out a little bit when you're wearing them, the cables are pretty visible. But I don't think I want to knit that sweater pattern anymore. I don't know if I want to knit that sweater period, but even if I did want to knit that sweater pattern, I don't think I would want to use this color because I don't mind knitting cables in a darker color, but I think the darker color in conjunction with the mohair, just you don't really get a lot of definition in the cables. But also maybe that pattern has more spaces in between the cables, so it would be more apparent. I don't know. I'll be honest that while I really like this color, it has not been on the forefront of my mind. And I have so many other sweater quantities, and I'm not going to stress about it right now. All that said, I stuck to my motto of prioritizing current projects over future hypothetical ones. So I had been tempted to purchase more of this yarn to make these mittens because I didn't want to break into my sweater quantity. But like I said, who knows when I will knit that, what I will knit that into. It's better to use the yarn for a project that I'm currently knitting. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but these are a gift knit for my mom. And I do really like the way that these feel together. And I wanted to put mohair in the mittens because I feel like the fluff will just make them a little bit warmer because it'll fill in all the gaps with the cables that you get with cabling. Yeah, these don't take a lot of time, but again, I just like haven't been really motivated to knit. Basically, like all the projects I'm talking about today, I would love to get done in the winter. We are having a very, very, very cold winter, especially compared to the last few years. So ideally, I'd like to get these projects done this winter so that they can be used this winter. And yeah, I just need to find my knitting mojo. Okay, that was my first strip. I feel like I talked about that a lot. Then I have, since I'm on accessories, let me talk very quickly about my sock projects and then I will get to my sweaters. I'm really sorry about like this lighting situation, but there's nothing I can do about it. It is what it is. So my goal for this year is to knit 8 pairs of socks, and I realized I can cheat a little because I knit a lot of single socks last year. So if I knit the second sock this year, I'm gonna count that as a full pair that goes towards the 8 pairs goal. So that said, I decided to pick up 2 older sock projects over the last month. So this first one, I cast this sock on back in July of 2023. And I knit like 80% of the sock. This is a toe-up sock. I knit literally like all the way through the heel flap and gusset. Basically, I just had maybe like this much left of the sock. Basically the cuff and maybe 10 rows of the leg. And this was my first time doing This was my first time doing a toe-up sock, and I just wanted to try it out. It is not my favorite construction, and unless I'm knitting a pattern that just doesn't work if I'm doing it cuff down, I would not do a toe-up sock again. Or at least, let me amend that statement. I would not do a toe-up sock with a heel flap and gusset again because it was really hard for me to gauge how long to knit the foot. And I do think I knit it a little bit too long, so the sock is a little bit loose on me. And this is another free pattern, are the fidget socks. Again, I don't remember the designer's name off the top of my head, but I will write their name on the screen and in my show notes. It has a very, very simple slip stitch pattern that you work over the top of the sock. So I had not picked up this sock in a year and a half, and when I picked it up, I didn't even have to look up the pattern because it's really that easy. Like if you know how to read your knitting, you can look at the chart once, knit it once maybe, and then it's just in your mind. So I did really like this slip stitch pattern, and I would knit that again. I would probably just knit it as a cuff down sock. I think I was specifically looking for a toe-up sock when I was making this because I wanted to learn how to do a toe-up sock and see if I liked it. I learned that I do not. And I don't really like the toe on the toe-up sock. I think, is it a Turkish cast on? And I feel like you just get like those little bunny ears or whatever, those little pointy outfits. I don't like. I haven't blocked this sock yet, so maybe it will be better when I block it, but I feel like a Kitchener toe just has a cleaner finish than this Turkish cast on. That was not my favorite either. Also, I tried binding off in pattern, but it wasn't touchy enough, so I had to rip out the bind off and then do Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, where you basically add a yarn over in between each stitch during your bind off. But I had to add more yarn to do that, so I have 3 yarn ends at the cuff of the sock, which is annoying, but it is my fault. And then the yarn that I knit this in, I really, really love this yarn. This base is actually the base that convinced me that, oh, I don't hate knitting socks. I was just trying to knit socks with yarn that I didn't love. It is the Hedgehog Fibers, I want to say it's a twist sock base. It's a 2-ply, 60% BFL, 20% nylon blend, and I really, really like it. It has like doesn't have the same like smoothness and shininess that a superwash merino gives, which I personally don't love. So it has a little bit more, I guess, of like a woolly feel to it, but it is still a superwash yarn, so you can throw it in the washing machine. I personally still hand wash my socks, but I do prefer superwash yarns for my socks because I feel like they're less likely to felt, and I like knowing that I can toss them in the washing machine if I need to. That is sock number 1 that I finished, and I don't know when I'm going to cast on the second sock of this, hopefully soon. And then the second sock I started working on is a fresh cast on. It is this self-striping sock tube that I'm knitting with the Ponyo colorway from Tiny Human Knits. It's a really, really fun, playful color. Let me bring it up. So the repeat is, let's see, yellow, blue, white, green, darker orange, lighter orange. And I'm just knitting a soft sock tube so I can go in and do an afterthought heel. This is, I think, also the first sock where I did a 3x1 rib, and it's more enjoyable to knit than a 1x1 rib. It's still stretchy enough for me to get it over my heel, and it just goes by quicker than a 1x1 rib. Basically, I just hate 1x1 rib, and I will do anything not to knit 1x1 rib. I cast this on very quickly because I was helping my brother move this weekend, and I wanted to bring a project with me in case like I had some time where I was just like waiting and didn't have anything to do. And thank God I did, because I was able to knit half of this sock tube while waiting. Like, downtime. Yes, I am almost done with 2 pattern repeats for it. For sock number 1, which I knit last summer, I think, for Nitty Natty's sock week. For sock number 1, I knit 4 pattern repeats. So I got halfway through. And I really feel like self-striping socks basically just knit themselves. I have a reel that I posted last summer, I remember, of me knitting this sock, and I knit like 75% basically. 3 out of the 4 repeats I knit on a Sunday while I was like out and about. And yeah, it just goes so quickly because you're like, oh, let me just finish this stripe. Let me just finish this stripe. I mean, I did go to the movies, so I did have a big chunk of knitting time then, but yeah, it just moves so fast. Downside of it is because I was out and about, I didn't have the ability to do a heel because I was like walking around and knitting. So I did do an afterthought heel, and I do think it came out pretty clean. And I did the modification where you knit a few plain rows before you start your decreasing. Alas, I have a pretty deep, I don't know the name of the part of the foot, basically like my heel to like the top of my foot, this part of my foot is pretty wide. So afterthought heels just do not fit me very well. So I showed my mom this sock and I asked her if she liked the colors, and she did. And because we have the same size foot, my foot is just a little bit wider than hers, this sock will fit her. and the plan is to gift her this set of socks. Hopefully this also gets done relatively soon. This is project I've just been like keeping in my bag, and whenever I have like 5 minutes, I can knit on it. So I forgot how pleasant sock projects can be. I feel like when my sock mojo is there, it's really there, and I just want to like knit a sock at any possible moment. But when it's not there, it's really not there. And I really just love knitting vanilla socks. I love the look of color work and cabled and lace sock, but I love the ease of a vanilla sock. I do think after this sock though, I do kind of want to try a color work sock. Just something that has color work along the cuff, so I can knit that, and then the rest of the sock will just be a plain vanilla sock. So it'll be more mindless knitting. Those are my sock updates. So now let me talk to you about my sweater updates. I only had 2 sweater projects that I was working on. So my first project is my cardigan number 9. This is a pattern by My Favorite Things Knitwear, and I'm so close to being done. I really wanted to get this done by the podcast, but it didn't happen. This is actually my second time knitting this pattern because I knit one last summer and I've just been getting so much wear out of it. It was in my most worn sweaters of 2024 video that I decided I wanted to knit another version in my favorite color of the moment, which is chocolate brown. So this is a saddle shoulder construction cardigan, which you knit top down. So you start off with 2 rectangles for your saddle shoulders. And I really love that construction because that is basically like a really large gauge swatch. You don't have to make a dedicated gauge swatch, or at least I did not. And then you join the 2 saddles to create the back yoke, pick up stitches for the front yoke, and then it's like a pretty standard top-down sweater construction from that point on. My favorite detail about this sweater is the neckline. So in the neckline, when you pick up stitches, you knit a few rows of double knitting, and it just makes for a more like sturdier neckline. It's not as floppy and less prone to gaping, and I'm a big fan of it. And then I did the same modification that I did on my first version of the sweater. So the pattern as written has you work a yarn over buttonhole, which is basically like a 1-stitch buttonhole. However, I find that when you have a buttonhole that small, it tends to just like stretch out over time, especially if you are using larger buttons, which this pattern does recommend 22 to 25 millimeter buttons, which are on the larger side, in my opinion. So I worked a 1-row buttonhole over I forget if it's over 3 or 4 stitches. Basically, I just followed my project notes for my previous version because I liked how the buttonholes looked on that as well. And you can see here's buttonhole number 1. Here is buttonhole number 2. I think it's just a lot cleaner and sturdier than the yarn over buttonhole that is written in the pattern. My other modification is that I could not do the tubular bind off on this. For all the other sections, I knew I was going to bind off in pattern, but for the ribbing, I really tried to do the tubular bind off, and I actually did do it with the setup rows on one side, and it looked terrible. It looked so lumpy and uneven, and a lot of people did give me helpful tips on like you can felt the pieces together before you do the bind off, or you can like twist the yarn to make it more sturdy before you do the bind off, and I did try those and it just didn't work for me. I think because it was getting caught with the mohair. I think if I was doing a bind off only with the unspun yarn, it could work. I would just do it in smaller bits, which I've done in the past where you felt it and then just do it in smaller bits. However, because I wanted to use the mohair in the bind off, I think I have a picture of what the bind off looked like. It looked terrible in my opinion. So I literally just took my scissors, I cut it out, and I bound off in pattern, and I like the way it looks better. It's much cleaner than my terrible tubular bind off. And I just have both of the sleeves left, and the reason why, so usually I just knit one sleeve in its entirety and then knit the second sleeve. I actually usually knit the sleeves before I even finish the body. However, with this pattern, I am playing yarn chicken. So I'm knitting this with 2 yarns. I'm knitting it with Manchalope by Wool Dreamers, which is an unspun yarn. It comes double-stranded in a plate, and I just hand wind it into balls. I find working from a ball of unspun is much easier than working from the plate, because when you're pulling from the plate, there's quite a lot of friction, versus a ball has less friction and it's less likely to rip. And I'm holding it with a strand of the Drops Kid Silk Mohair in color number 15. And this is another yarn that is deep stash from when I first started knitting, another 3-year-old yarn. And I only had 4 balls of this, and ideally I would have had 5, but I forgot what project I purchased this for, something like bulky weight. So basically I'm just weighing this and going back, and I knit the first sleeve and then knit the second sleeve and then weighed the yarn, and I'm basically trying to get through as much of the sleeves as I can with this yarn. Now, I do have another brown mohair in stash that I could start helically knitting in, or there is a yarn store all the way up north, like an hour away from me in Jersey, on the state line to New York, and they sell this yarn and they do have this color in stock. So I've been like waffling back and forth on what I want to do. This is the first weekend where I have the time that I could go up to that store and purchase the yarn. I currently have 7 grams of the mohair left, and I'm only about halfway through each sleeve. The first half of the sleeve took 8 grams, and each subsequent decrease has been taking me about 1 gram. And I have 6 decreases left on each sleeve, so this will not be enough. But I'm just gonna do as much as I can. Overall, I do really like the construction of this cardigan, and I am excited to have the finished object. Then my last sweater project, or my second sweater project, is one I will not talk a lot about, because I've been talking a lot about it over my last few podcasts, and I haven't made like some sort of progress that I have additional information to add. So if you want to hear me talk about this pattern, like I had some issues with the charts, you can watch my previous podcast episode or 2. This is the Joha Loop sweater by Other Loops. It is a top-down raglan sweater pattern that I'm knitting with Peace Fleece, and then the white is Patton's Croy wool worsted, held with a strand of the Drops Kid Silk Mohair. The previous episode, I basically was finished. I had bound off the body, and I was waffling about what to do because my dad wanted it to be narrower. He basically wanted me to add in some waist shaping, and I had thought about like cutting and grafting and all this stuff, but ultimately I decided that was not the right move, because I just wasn't sure how I would graft it, because I did rapid decreases towards the end before the ribbing. So I ended up just ripping it out until right after the sleeve separation, and I have started re-knitting the body and doing more regular decreases. This one should work up pretty quickly. Like when I knit it the first time, the body only took me 2 or 3 days. I haven't had the motivation to knit it, and also I want my dad to try it on again before I continue working these decreases. Moved over a little bit, so hopefully it's okay. I technically have 2 works in progress. One is a mini quilting update, which I will talk about very briefly, but I do have one last knitting work in progress, and that is my jigsaw puzzle blanket. This is a pattern by Stephen West, and it is knit modularly. It's a modular knit pattern, and my goal for this year is basically to knit 4 sections per month, or about 100 grams of yarn. And then hopefully by the end of the year I will have a finished blanket. And I'm happy to report that I did get my 4 sections done for January, and I actually also wove. It doesn't look like it, but I actually did weave in most of the ends. I just didn't cut all of them because I don't really like to cut the yarn until I block it. So any of the yarn ends that were like in the center, I blocked, but then the ones like on the end where I'm still gonna have to pick up stitches, I have not woven those in yet. And I think last time when I was talking about it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go the ugly scrappy route, or if I wanted to use yarn from stash but also buy yarn to make it a little bit more aesthetic. And you can probably tell I decided to go the ugly scrappy route, sort of. So I took stock of all the scrap yarn that I had in my stash, and I planned out, based on like how much I had of each color, what sections I would like to knit them in. but I don't have enough scrap yarn to knit the entire blanket. So I am also planning on purchasing some yarns to have enough yarn to make the whole thing. So I am going to be I'm going to be using sash yarn for as long as I can, but when I reach the point where I have run out of scraps to use, then I will purchase more yarn. And I am currently working on section 5, which is my first section for February, and I'm using this color that I really, really like, but I don't like the yarn base. I just adjusted my camera, so hopefully it's a little bit brighter, or maybe it'll move up a little. I think that's better. So I really like this color, but I don't really like the yarn base. This is Sandnes Sisu, and I want to say the color is like blue hortensia, something like that. Is that blue hydrangea in English? I don't remember. But I really, really like this blue. It's a very nice, like lightish, medium, skyish blue. And I did knit one sock with it. I had 2 balls of this. I knit one sock. I don't know where that one sock went. I don't know if I will ever knit the second sock. So I just decided to put it into this blanket because I really like the color. The reason I don't really like the yarn, I just feel like when I'm knitting socks with it, it feels kind of splitty. I'm holding it double for the blanket and using 4.5mm needles, so I don't have any problems knitting it in the blanket. But when using like 2.5mm needles and knitting something so tiny, I found it to be quite splitty. So not my favorite sock yarn base, but I do really like the colors that they have. I haven't picked up this blanket in quite some time, so maybe I will make some progress on it this weekend. The section that I'm on does have a lot of stitches, so I do predict it will go a little bit slower. I am also a little bit worried. So I was able to finish 4 sections for January. However, these sections were all pretty small, and I noticed that the beginning sections of this blanket are all pretty small, but then when you get towards the end, the sections get bigger and bigger. So I'm a little bit worried that later on in the year, when I'm working on this blanket, I will struggle to keep up. I guess that's a problem for future me. It is getting quite dark now, but I have a little bit more to talk about. I do have some acquisitions. Oh, let me share my very, very quick quilting update. And if you don't want to see it, you can just skip to the next chapter, which will be acquisitions. So I shared, I think in my last podcast episode, how I sewed my first quilt as a gift for my newborn niece. And I did have a lot of fabric left over because it was my first time making a quilt. I didn't really know like how the colors would work together. So I ended up buying quite an excess of fabric. So I decided for my second quilt, I would like to use as much of that fabric as I could. And I talked about it on Instagram and I was like talking about different patterns. I ultimately settled on the Eloise pattern by Penelope Handmade, and she had a version where she made it with all solid colors, and I really, really liked the way that it looked. So I decided to make my own scrappy version, which with solid colors. I don't really have anything solid for you to see because it has just been taking me forever to cut out the pieces for this quilt. So I've been cutting out long strips, and then the pattern gives you instructions on how to make these like little, basically you have 2 squares sewn together, and I have to make 640 of these. So far I have made about 550 of them. Actually, I might have made close to 600 because I do have all of these excess leftovers. So I think by the end of it, I'll probably have made almost like 700 of these. But I'm really excited to see that quilt come together, and I will still have scraps left over in the quilt. So maybe I'll make something smaller with these leftovers because I've really been liking looking at like what other quilters are making. And actually, one of the things I wanted to make this year was a needle case. So maybe I could use these for a needle case, or I could also make a sewing machine cover or a serger cover. Really, there are there are endless options on what I could do. And because I want this to be a scrappy quilt, I think I'm going to also try to piece the backing to have a scrappy backing. So like the whole quilt is scrappy. And I have a lot of, basically to make these, I cut a bunch of long strips and I have a lot of those left over, so I already know my binding will be scrappy too. Okay, so that's the end of the works in progress, and I do have some acquisitions. So the first of the acquisitions is a yarn that I could potentially use to finish up my cardigan number 9. Sorry for the crinkling. And that is this new yarn from Kelbar and Roland. So they did send this yarn to me as a gift with no obligations to talk about it. It is their Harmony base, which is 72% good mohair, 28% mulberry silk with 230 yards / 210 meters for 25 grams. And this is the color 210 chocolate. This mohair feels really, really nice. Like, it doesn't really have any itch factor to it. And even though it is a darker color, it also has a darker silk core. Like, the silk core perfectly matches the fluffy part of the yarn. So I'm very excited to knit with this yarn. I had been thinking of making the Cumulus Blouse O-neck by Petite Knit or the Cloud Sweater by Petite Knit, but I do have a lot of chocolate brown yarn in stash, and I'm going to be hopefully using some of that yarn up this year. So I do have plans for other stockinette chocolate brown sweaters. So I was thinking of what I could make with this that'd be a little bit different. And I thought maybe I could knit an all mohair Celeste sweater by Petite Knit. So the Celeste sweater has a color brick yoke, and then the rest of the body is plain. Sorry, I just had to cut out my cough. The rest of the body is plain, and when it came out in 2023, I made like a little mood board of some of the potential colors I would like to knit this sweater in, and I wanted to have the body wear dark brown color, but I didn't have yarn in stash for it. So I revisited that mood board, and I thought maybe I could use this dark brown mohair held double as the main color, and then I went in my stash to see what other mohairs I had that I could potentially use as my contrast colors. And here are the 4 colors that I came up with late. Let me grab the dark chocolate brown so you can see them all together. Here is my potential color palette for the Celeste sweater. The only thing is, Petite Knit does not give yardages of how much you need for the sweater. Basically, each size could be made with a 50 gram ball of pure Gant. So I'm unsure about the yardage, and all of these yarns are used. So I don't know if I will have enough or if I will have to buy a second ball. But I have been thinking of other scrappy mohair projects, so maybe having leftovers wouldn't be the end of the world. If I did have to purchase more of these yarns for the sweater, I would like to know before I start. That way I could hold a strand of the new yarn and hold a strand of the old yarn double, instead of, let's say I knit all of this up and then I buy a new ball and it's a different dye lot, and then there's like a line. Or actually, for color work, it shouldn't matter. Okay. Yeah, it shouldn't matter with color work. Okay. Then I can just start knitting this, and then if I run out, then I'll purchase new yarn. Yeah, that makes sense. Woohoo. So that was one yarn acquisition. My second yarn acquisition is what I purchased from VKL Vogue Knitting Live. This was my 3rd year going to Vogue Knitting Live, and honestly, not to be a hater, not to be a downer, I think this might be my last year going to Vogue Knitting Live. I feel like the first year I really, really enjoyed. Actually, the last 2 years I really, really enjoyed it, but this year I feel like it was just kind of meh. Like, there weren't as many vendors, and some of the floors were just kind of empty, and I really, really hate going to Times Square. Like, it makes me miserable, especially this time of year when the weather is so terrible. Like, it was just rainy, I was cold, and then I was sweaty, and yeah, I just feel like I didn't necessarily get my value going there. I don't know. I feel like everybody else has a good time, so maybe I'm just being a hater, but I did not enjoy it as much as previous years. I think that's also because a lot of the larger vendors were there, like Nitty City and Brooklyn General Store usually both have pretty large booths there. And this year, I think Brooklyn General Store like had their own event, and the tickets for the marketplace on Saturday are $30, which is quite pricey. However, I will say, if you are local, they always share like last minute 50% off codes for the marketplace ticket, so it's only $15. But when I think about like the price of this marketplace versus going to Rhinebeck, like at Rhinebeck, I definitely feel like I get more of a value. There's like so many other things to see here. Whereas here, in previous years, it was worth it because they just had so many different vendors. But I think this year, because it was a little bit emptier, personally, for me, it just was not as worth it. even though I did really enjoy seeing the vendors that I saw, and I'm really happy with the yarn that I purchased, I just feel like overall the quality of the event has gone down a little bit. If you went, I would love to know your thoughts. Like, am I just being a hater, or are other people feeling the same way? I would love to know. That said, I really, really enjoyed the yarn that I purchased. So here it is. I purchased 2 skeins of farm yarn from Henny Penny Farm in Connecticut. And this is their 1275 2-ply worsted weight, 100% Romney wool, and it is farmed, naturally dyed, and milled in Connecticut. And I was talking to the owner of the farm, and she was so lovely. She was telling me about the different yarn bases that she had and like the different sheep that the yarns are made of. And I really enjoyed learning about that. And going into this event, all I really wanted to purchase was farm yarn or like locally US made wool. And that was a success. And I talked about in my 2025 making plans that I'd like to make a scrappy farm yarn sweater with the various like dark brown farm yarns that I've purchased over the last year. So I have this one from Connecticut, I have some from New Jersey, and I might be a little bit short, so maybe I'll try to find some farm yarn from like New York or Pennsylvania, so it can just be like all super local to me farm yarn into this sweater. And this is, oh, I didn't say, this is the color Harbor Seal. And then I also bought a mini skein. This is, I forget the brand. I will write it on the screen. I think it was like American EU, something like that, owned by Cece's Wool. And they had all American milled and made grown yarns. And then they had these mini skeins. So I think this is their DK weight base. Penstemon sample, Shanico wool tweed, 89% Shanico wool, 6% acrylic, and 5% rayon. And I'm assuming that the rayon and acrylic are from the little tweedy bits. Now, I think I've said before that I don't like a lot of tweed yarn. Like, I like Donegal tweed yarn or like Nora tweed yarns, but I don't really like the hand-dyed tweed yarns where the nips really look like they were added after the fact. The nips look like they were really like blended into the yarn. And I just bought this mini skein because I have had mittens on my mind, and I thought this would be a really nice contrast color and a pair of colorwork mittens, and it's like the perfect amount for that too. And I've been wanting to try Shanico wool because I feel like a lot of knitting podcasters that I listen to have talked about Shanico wool over the past like 6 or so months, and I've been wanting to try it. I actually might have some Shanico wool in stash. I'll have to double check, but this is 100%. I know that it is Shanico wool. Even though it is not 100% Shanico wool, it is 89% Shanico wool. And then for my last acquisition, I just wanted to say thank you. So last month, I don't think I talked about it in the video, but just like in the notes for each video, I've been linking to a Ravelry wish list where I just had like a few patterns that are on my wish list that I would like to make. And somebody on Ravelry called GMA Karen was very, very kind, and she gifted me the other loops. I think it's the twist loop roll neck sweater pattern to me, and I just wanted to say thank you again. That was such a sweet surprise, and I'm so looking forward to knitting that pattern. And it is definitely jumping up my queue because I'm so thankful that Karen gifted it to me. And as far as like my future knitting plans, what I'm thinking is the Hannah sweater is getting pushed back again. It's still going to be cast on this year. It's going to be cast on before the end of March. I'm saying that. However, I feel like I have a shorter window to knit things with mohair, so I'm going to be prioritizing the projects that I want to make with mohair before the projects that I want to make without mohair. So the Hannah sweater, I'm going to be knitting it with a single strand of wool, so I can knit that into the spring without like my hands getting sweaty, versus my mohair knits. It just makes more sense to knit those while it is super duper cold. And yeah, hopefully I will get the 2 sweater projects that I talked about today done relatively quickly. I'm not going to give myself any more deadlines because I keep saying, oh, I want this done by the next episode. It's been 4 weeks since the last episode and I still haven't finished these projects because my knitting mojo won't kaput. Hopefully I find my knitting mojo so I can finish up these projects. I think just like having these lingering WIPs have kind of drained my knitting mojo, but at the same time, I haven't been wanting to cast on new things because I don't want these to become languishing WIPs that never get finished. So it's just been like a battle between those two mindsets. But I do think my next two cast-ons, so I have three potential projects for cast-ons. One is a Celeste sweater that I was talking about, an all mohair Celeste sweater. The other one is the Nordic mix sweater because I'm in an Instagram group chat where everybody is knitting that sweater, and I would love to be an active participant instead of just like looking at everybody's beautiful projects and like progress photos. And then also this Twist Loops roll neck sweater. All three of these have mohair, so yeah, these are going to be taking priority because I want to knit with mohair while it's still really cold. Actually, I think Groundhog Day said we're going to be having a long winter, and that tracks with how cold it's been. So I guess I shouldn't be panicking too much about running out of time to work on my mohair projects. Okay, that is the end of my knitting talk. If that's all you want to hear about, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again next time, and happy knitting. However, I thought I would chuck in a little section on what I've been reading and watching while knitting over the past month. So I did finish Onyx Storm. I don't know, it was kind of disappointing. I feel like nothing really happened in the whole book. It was just very much a filler book in my opinion, but that's just kind of prone to happen when you have a long series. And yeah, the pacing of the book was weird. I don't really know what's gonna happen. And then I think the author said that she has a bigger break in between this book and the next book, so hopefully the next book is an improvement. But I will say that I tried to listen to like a few YouTube videos and looked at the subreddit for the series, and seeing like other people's excitement and theories and whatever for the book did make it a little bit better in my eyes. So if you also read the book and you found it a little bit disappointing, I suggest just checking out like the fan community around the book, because maybe it will also boost your enthusiasm and interest in the book like it did for me. And then I also started a new series, and I actually finished the series this week because I was really, really into it. It's the Marlowe Murder Club series. So basically it follows three women who are living in a town in England, and there is a murder in their town, a series of murders, and they're trying to figure out what happened. And so far there are 3 books in the series. I will say, for the first 2 books, I was able to figure out the murder like partway through the book. Actually, for the second book, I figured out the murder like pretty close to the beginning. But I actually don't see that as a con. I like when authors leave like clues along the way so that the reader could figure it out if they wanted to. So I see that as a pro rather than a con. So I really enjoyed the series. It's like very cozy and it's very tropey, but I enjoyed it. And I think there's a 4th book coming out this year, and I plan on reading that as well. And then after that, I was just kind of like in a cozy British mysteries kind of mood. So I started a new series from, I think it's MC Beaton is the author, and it is the Agatha Raisin series. These are older books, so I'm still reading the first book, and there are like kind of like some things I'm side-eyeing a little bit that authors probably wouldn't say today, but they would say like 40 or 50 years ago. But I like Agatha Christie books, so I can deal with that. I just take it as like it's of that time. But this series has a ton of books, so I will have a lot of reading ahead of me, because sometimes I feel like after I finish a book, I'm kind of stuck if I don't have like another book already checked out. And this section is going on a little bit long, but I just realized there's other books that I really, really enjoyed reading last month that I want to talk about. And then I also read this fantasy book that I loved. I really, really enjoyed this book. I think it's called, I can't even remember the name off the top of my head, but it'll be on the screen. It's like Blood Over Moon something. I don't remember, but I can't even like explain the book. It is like this girl who is trying to be like a master magician in this alternate reality, and then like she's working with somebody who comes from a different society and like they're looked down upon. I don't know. There's a lot of like commentary about like racism, sexism, colonialism, imperialism, and it definitely hits you over the head. But I think it does it in a good way, like in a way that feels very authentic. And I think we live in a time where some people need these messages to hit them over the head. Like it's not like in a performative way, and like let's say compared to like and just like that the Sex and the City reboot where everything just feels like not genuine and very performative. The messages in this book I think came across very genuine, and I really enjoyed the story, and I would totally recommend the book. I also like that it's a standalone because I feel like a lot of the fantasy novels are not standalones. Like you think it's a standalone, and then at the end there's just like a cliffhanger. And it's like, oh, by the way, we're gonna turn this into like a 7-book series. Another book that I really, really enjoyed last month was I think God of the Woods. And this is a book that I don't really necessarily love books that have this like flashback section where they're going from one timeline to the other. But I thought this was another interesting book that also had like some commentary on like class dynamics. So there is a girl, this wealthy girl, who is going to summer camp that her family owns, and then she ends up going missing, and then there's like a mystery what happened to her because her brother also went missing like 20 years ago at the same summer camp that her family owns. And yeah, you just get like the timeline and back and forth between what was happening back then and what is happening today. And by today, I think the present day of the story takes place, I think I want to say like in the 80s. So it's not like today. I also really, really enjoyed that book. So overall, it has been a positive month of reading. I also finished a book that I have literally been reading for the past year. It is In the Shadow of the Empress by Nancy Goldstone, and it is a book about Maria Theresa, who was like the Holy Roman Empress and all her children. And all I can say about this book is it made me feel so sad, and I would never want to be like a, what is it, 16th century? 18th century? I would never want to be an 18th century princess. It just sounds absolutely miserable. Wait, is it 18th century? This is gonna bother me. How did I read this book and like not remember the year? Yeah, it is 18th century because her daughter is Marie Antoinette. If you thought Marie Antoinette's life was miserable, her sisters' lives were miserable too. But it was a fascinating book to read and learning more about a very formidable woman and her daughters. And her sons too, but like whatever about the sons. I'm more interested to learn about the girlies, but I was finally excited to finish reading the book after a whole year. Okay, that is the end of my reading recap and the end of this podcast. Oh, wait. Very, very quickly, TV show that I've been loving is the current season of The Traitors. It's so good. It has so much drama. I don't necessarily love reality TV because I feel like it moves kind of slow, but this show is very fast moving. Every second has drama, has intrigue, and I recommend giving it a watch if you have Peacock or if you have other ways to watch the show. Okay, truly the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I would love to know what was on your needles while watching this video. And apologies again for the terrible lighting. That is just like something I have to say every video because the sun never agrees with me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day. I hope you have fun knitting, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!